And it was also thought at that time that important prophets like Jesus were either born or conceived on the same day that they died.
Hmm.
And if Jesus was conceived on March the 25th, which is still the Feast of the Annunciation,
Okay.
then add 9 months, you get December the 25th.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. My name is Dr. Brent Simpson, and I get the privilege of being your host for what is going to be an amazing podcast today as we continue our conversation on Christmas. Make sure that you like this channel, make sure that you subscribe, because today is going to be so much fun as we continue our conversation with James Cooper, the founder of whychristmas.com, which is a website that literally has answers to every question you could ever have. And he is Mr. Christmas himself. So welcome back to the podcast, James.
Thank you very much for having me. It's great, always fun to talk about Christmas.
So let's jump right back into some more Christmas talk. James, I'm sure you have a million Christmas albums. Tell me, what is your favorite Christmas carol and why?
Okay, I've got well over 500 Christmas albums in my collection, so I kind of have a
Holy
hard
moly.
job with this
Yeah.
question. But if I have to narrow it down to one, it would have to be "In the Bleak Midwinter." I know it's not quite theologically accurate, but the last verse, "What can I give him, poor as I am? If I was a shepherd, I'd bring a lamb. If I was a wise man, I would do my part. But what I give him? I give him my heart." I just think that really sums up the message of Christmas to me.
Wow, that is such a beautiful message in that song. And if I'm honest with you, I don't think I've ever even heard of that song before, but I think it is amazing. And it kind of makes me reflect on some people will complain about the commercialization of Christmas, but sometimes it's some of the traditions and Christmas carols and such that seems like it helps to spread the gospel of Jesus Christ and the message of Christ as those traditions go outward. And so sometimes there seems to be a tension between the Christmas traditions and the Christmas commercialization on whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just curious, what would you say to that?
I think it's quite a tricky balance to strike, really. Yeah, I mean, I
Yeah.
always, certainly on my Christmas, I try and sort of play down the commercial side of it. I mean, you might notice that there are no ads on it, and I deliberately have a no ad policy on the site. I've been offered
Right.
big money over the years by big companies to have ads, and I
Wow.
always say no, because I want to share the only thing that I advertise on the site is Jesus. So I want to make sure that the Christmas story doesn't get lost, because sometimes it just sort of gets lost in
Right.
everything else. But I always try and point back that that's the reason we have Christmas.
Hmm.
That's why the reason that people started celebrating Christmas. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
All right, let's move on from Christmas carols and songs and singing, which is sort of a tradition around the world in all kinds of regards, to something that is totally bizarre, and that is the Christmas tree. What a weird tradition that we're going to go outside, chop a tree down, and drag it into our house. Why would we ever do a crazy thing like that? And so, can you answer that, James? Where did the Christmas tree tradition come from? And then, if you don't mind, jump in as well with people that might say that Jeremiah chapter 10 actually says that we shouldn't have a Christmas tree in our house. Therefore, the Bible forbids it. How would you respond to people that might say something like that?
Sure. Yeah. The trees, a lot of Christmas traditions, ones that sort of go back quite a long way. The answer is no one's actually sure. But
Right.
the earliest record that we seem to have at Christmas trees is in the Middle Ages in Northern Europe, in the UK, in France, Germany. They would have what's called miracle plays. And they happened outside big churches and cathedrals on Christmas Eve. And they told the Bible story from the Garden of Eden through to Jesus.
Hmm.
They were kind of like proto Handel's Messiah in a way.
Okay.
And to advertise the fact that the plays were happening, they would have what they called the paradise trees, which was a branch of wood that would have apples nailed onto it to represent the tree in the Garden of Eden. And that would be paraded round the town. And that's the first sort of record that we have of a Christmas tree of some sort. Then a couple of hundred years later, in the 1400s, 1500s, in parts of northern Germany, people started cutting branches of fir trees and bringing them into their house, and again to decorate them with apples. And they were known as Christbaums, Christ trees.
Okay.
So why did they do that? Was it for smell or something like that?
It was, yeah, partly for the smell, and just because having greenery in your house had been a thing in Northern Europe for thousands of years, just
Right.
because it brightened the place up
Yep.
during the winter. And
Hmm.
also things like fir trees are thought to have some sort of antimicrobial and anti-insect
Right.
qualities. So if
Okay.
you're living in a drafty house with lots of bugs during the winter, bringing anything in that makes
Right.
it smell
Right.
nicer and keeps the bugs away is probably a
Okay.
good idea.
Right. Right.
So it developed from there, and then the earliest record of Christmas trees are in the late 1500s in what's now parts of Latvia and Estonia, but they were also part of the same Germanic kingdom back then. But they were more like sort of maypoles come Yule logs that were erected in town squares. The earliest ones in houses were around the Strasbourg region in the early 1600s. Um,
Hmm.
Christmas trees didn't get over to the UK really until the 1840s. Um, One of the wives of King George III put a tree up in 1800
Hmm.
because she was German. For a children's party at Windsor Castle, but it was a very odd thing that only sort of the German people with German heritage had ever seen before, and everybody thought it was a bit weird. But in 1848, one of the London newspapers produced a drawing of Queen Victoria and her German husband Prince Albert's family Christmas tree in one of the London newspapers, and then it became a really fashionable thing to happen. And then in 1851, that same drawing was published in Philadelphia.
Hmm.
But it was in a very early mention of Photoshop. They took off Prince Albert's moustache and Queen Victoria's tiara to make it look more homely. Um, and then it became fashionable in America.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's and why we have red baubles on Christmas trees is because the first glass blowers in Germany were making red apples, and globes were easier to make than apple shapes. So if you have red baubles on your trees, they go all the way back to the Middle Ages, representing the tree of the Garden of Eden at Miracle Place. Yeah, Jeremiah 10. Well, I have a page on my site called
Hmm.
Christmas Misconceptions, which covers all of this
Okay.
sort of thing. And if we
Right.
go and look what Jeremiah 10 actually says, it says, "Hear what the Lord says to you, people of Israel. This is what the Lord says. Do not learn the ways of the nations or be terrified by the signs of heavens, through the nations are terrified of them. For the practices of the people are worthless. They cut the tree out of the forest and crafts and shapes it with his chisel. They adorn it with silver and gold. They fasten it with a hammer and nail so it will not totter. Like a scarecrow in a cucumber field, their idols cannot speak. They must be carried because they cannot walk. Do not fear them, because they can do no harm, nor and can they do any good." That's clearly talking about a carved idol,
Right.
not a tree, because it's talking
Right.
about it speaking and walking,
Hmm.
which is clearly a carved idol rather than a tree figure. Lots of the
Right.
another connection that goes back to the Christmas trees are pagan goes back to a guy called Alexander Hislop. I don't know if you've heard of him. He wrote a pamphlet called The Two Babylons. He was a Scottish minister in the 1840s, and he was an ardent anti-Catholic and mad conspiracy theorist.
Hmm.
And he wrote this pamphlet called The Two Babylons, trying to connect anything with Catholicism back to ancient Babylonian religions.
Hmm.
And he either misunderstood lots of history or just frankly made loads of stuff up.
Hmm.
So it's one of his big reasons that Christmas was pagan was because of the word Yule, because we have Yule logs, which was he
Right.
connected to Christmas trees, because he said that they came from the Persian word Yalda.
Okay.
They kind of sound the same, but they have no linguistic connection whatsoever. And
Okay.
interestingly, Yalda is the name that Iranians and Persians now give to the winter solstice, but it
Hmm.
actually means birth.
Hmm.
And it was known as Yalda Night first by early Persian Christians celebrating Christmas at the solstice. So the word
Okay.
is actually Christian, it isn't pagan.
Wow, yeah, yeah, yeah. I feel like it's a common misconception for people that they hold that all these pagan traditions are what started Christian holidays, and we certainly know that there are a lot of pagan things within Christian holidays. But as far as Jeremiah chapter 10 goes, I just want to state clearly that I am in complete agreement with you. And for that matter, so is every Bible scholar and theologian that I know. That Jeremiah 10 is not talking about Christmas trees. It's talking about idols. And that is very clear, not a Christmas tree.
Well, yeah, and there are certainly some pagan elements within Christianity, within Christmas celebrations, because they just date back for so long. And where there are on the site, I point them out, but there aren't as many as people think. And if people say to me, you shouldn't celebrate Christmas because it's pagan, I always say to them, do you use the days of the week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday? And they say yes. Well, I say, well, they're named after the sun, the moon, and 5 Roman gods.
Yeah. Right.
All right, so let's jump into some fun church history and Christmas history. Every year, there's a meme that floats around on social media, the last few years at least, that as it floats around, it says something about St. Nicholas that says in regards like this, it's like a grumpy St. Nicholas, and he says, I've come to deliver presents and slap heretics, and I just ran out of presents. All right, so there is a tradition, there's a story that jolly old St. Nick actually slapped a heretic at the early church council of Nicaea, and then he was thrown in jail. All right, so James, tell us, is that fact or fiction?
Yeah, probably not. It's a great story, but probably not. There are records, some records show that he was at Nicaea, some records show that he wasn't. The leading theory at the moment is that the records that show him there were probably his name was probably added later because he was a famous Christian of that era, and he probably should have been there if he wasn't. He definitely was thrown in jail and was persecuted under the Emperor Diocletian, but that was probably separate to the any slapping or punching that went on.
Yeah.
All right, so that's a funny story that goes around, and it certainly is a different way of looking at Santa Claus during the holiday season, but we have heard it from Mr. Christmas himself that is probably not true. Sorry to burst everybody's bubbles. Okay, so here's a big question for Mr. Christmas himself. When was Jesus really born? Was it really December 25th, or was it sometime in the summer? What do the experts say? When do you believe that Jesus was actually born?
I go with the Festival of Tabernacles, which is in late September, early October. To me, that makes the most sense. If you go back through lots of the biblical records, one of my friends who's a biblical scholar over here has got a blog post that you can find a link to if you go on my site on the Why the 25th page. He has traced back Jeremiah's records of serving in the temple to when he encountered Gabriel. And if you work all of those dates in, it points to a tabernacle's birth. And it also fits biblically because in John 1, where it says the word came among us and lived with us, the literal translation is the word came and tabernacled among us.
Right. Okay.
Which fits really nicely.
Right.
It also can fit to one of the theories with the no room in the inn. Because they didn't have inns back then. The best translation of that in Luke is guest room. So a room similar to where the Last Supper was held. So I go with the theory that they slept with the animals in the downstairs of the house, because you had the animals in at night in the downstairs of the house and people slept on a mezzanine level. And you had a manger in the walls for animal feed overnight. So that makes good sense. But it could have been, if it was at Tabernacles, you'd have had all of these booths lining the streets where people would have stayed. So there certainly would have been space outside in one of these booths for people to have stayed in with animals. So that would have been perfectly natural as well.
Some people may be listening to this and they're thinking, why not December 25th? Why not the winter time? And I've heard it expressed this way, that during the winter time, shepherds did not keep their flock in the fields. Therefore, the shepherd story wouldn't line up because they wouldn't have their flocks in the fields, because they would take them inside at night during the winter time because it was simply too cold. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, that's one of the reasons for not the 25th. Although there is a really interesting theory called the Migdal Ada theory, but Jesus was born in one of the shepherds' watchtowers. I don't actually go for it, but it's a very interesting theory because the shepherds around that area of Bethlehem bred the sheep to go to the temples.
Right.
So the shepherds that would have visited Mary and Joseph would have taken their sheep to the temple. So that would have
Right.
spread like wildfire through the Jewish community.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
in the shepherds' watchtowers, they had a scoop in the ground where they put the lambs in to examine them to make sure that they were perfect to go to the temples. So Jesus could have been laid as a baby in one of the troughs to see that he was
Yeah.
perfect, which again is a
Yeah.
lovely theory.
Right. Right. Right.
The dating of the 25th, that probably actually comes from early Christians working out the death of Jesus, believe it or not. Because before Christians celebrated the birth of Jesus, they celebrated the death of Jesus. And so they wanted a more or less fixed date that they could celebrate for the death of Jesus. And some monks, various monks in around the 220s, came up with the date of March the 25th. And it was also thought at that time that important prophets like Jesus were either born or conceived on the same day that they died. And if Jesus was conceived on March the 25th, which is still the Feast of the Annunciation, then add 9 months, you get December the 25th.
Oh, okay.
And that also fits in with the 25th of Kislev, which is the date of Hanukkah in the Jewish calendar, which of course is the feast of the light of the world, the Feast of Lights. Jesus is the light of the world. So there were lots of things that came together, and it also fit in with existing midwinter festivals that they could then Christianize. But you will sometimes hear Christians and non-Christians will say that the Christians stole the date from the pagan solstice festivals. But if you line the dates up, Christians on the 25th of December before pagans nicked it for their date to celebrate the birth of the sun.
Okay. So we had the date first. We had dibs, right? All right. So I'm curious about this. I've been to Bethlehem many times. I've been to the Church of the Nativity many times, and it's my understanding, and I've understood it, that Jesus was born more in a cave. And sounds like you're expressing it more that maybe he was born in like a front porch kind of area. How does that align?
Well, yeah, how it worked is that you had like a house. And so you lived in the downstairs of the house during the day, and there was like a half floored mezzanine level where you slept at night, and you brought the animals into the house at night for like central heating. So it was like sort of the inside of the house courtyard that it would have been in. Yeah, the Church of the Nativity cave theory. The cave theory is really interesting because that comes about from the proto-evangelism of Thomas. And if you go with the cave theory, that's where oxen, the ox and the ass first turn up in the nativity story, but also in that same version, so do leopards and a dragon, but you never see those in nativity stories.
Right. Okay. Very, very interesting. All right, let's wrap up this podcast with the most important question. We are talking to a lot of Christian folks, a lot of Christian parents. We don't want to get lost in the marketing of Christmas and the materialism, the consumerism. We want to keep Christ right in the center of Christmas. So my question for you, for all these parents, for all of us, what are some traditions? How do you keep Christ in the middle of Christmas? And how would you recommend that we do that?
I think we've lost the magic of Advent, because for hundreds of years, Advent was the time leading up to Christmas. And then you started Christmas celebrations on the 25th, and they went through to the 5th of January, Epiphany Eve. That was when you celebrated Christmas. But leading up to Christmas during December was a much more religious time when you fasted and prayed and went to church. So I think we've lost some of that introspecting time. So have an Advent calendar, have an Advent candle. Take some time before Christmas to say this is what it's about.
Yeah.
And then like a nativity like I've got. Make something in your house, have a nativity scene. Just have something that reminds you of the reason rather than just all of the commercial stuff.
Yeah, that's so good. We want to keep Christ right in the middle of Christmas, right? We don't want Xmas. We don't want Xmas, right? Even though X is the short Greek symbol for Christ.
Yep. Yeah, Xmas was invented by monks saving time writing Christ.
Right. Nowadays, that's not usually the intent of the American people, who are far too often trying to take Christ out of Christmas instead of keeping him in Christmas. And so we're removing him from all Christmas decorations, Christmas decorations. he's oftentimes being removed from, and we're turning more into Santa Claus. But hey, let's not do that. If you're listening to this, let's be a people that keep Christ in the center of Christmas. Keep it what it is really about. Christ Mass, Christ Day. Let's make it a priority to move beyond the commercialization of Christmas and keep in the middle of it. James, this has been so much fun. I know our listeners have loved it. I've enjoyed it. So interesting. I love all the information that you bring and the stories and the history. Before we go off, is there anything else that you want to say before we wrap this episode up and tie it up with a bow like a present? Is there anything else that you want to say?
No, just sort of, if you want to know anything more about Christmas, please go to whychristmas.com. I'm happy to answer any questions if you email me through there. If you want to tell me your traditions, especially from your different part of the world that I haven't got covered on the site, that's always great to find out new ways of celebrating Christmas. And just happy Christmas, everyone.
Yeah, Merry Christmas to everyone. Hey, listen, I'm going to put a link inside of the show notes for whychristmas.com. If you want to go there, you can go to that link, or you can just type it in your URL yourself. Once again, James, thank you so much. It's been such a privilege to have you on this podcast. I know I speak for all of our listeners when I say we have thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you for investing your time and energy and keeping Christ in the middle of Christmas and doing your part. And thank you for joining us for this special holiday season. Now, for everybody who's watching, just do me that last favor. Make sure that you subscribe. Make sure you like this video. If you've enjoyed these, make sure you share them on social media or share them with somebody that you think will enjoy them as well. And I will see you next week for more Creating the Future.